Hello, welcome back to the Clap Podcast. As always, my name is Will Frost, and I'm really excited to introduce the episode this week. I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm joined by Philip Messina, the production designer of A24's new film Heretic, starring Hugh Grant. I was very fortunate to get Philip on the show. He's a phenomenal production designer that's worked on a great number of films within the industry. Beyond Heretic, he's worked on films such as the Hunger Games franchise, the Ocean's trilogy, 8 Mile, and so many more. His new film Heretic is a phenomenal film that I really recommend people go out and watch. We get into some great detail on the film. We speak about the decisions that were made in reference to the house that the film takes place in, that basically the whole film takes place in, and all the decisions that were made in order to support Hugh Grant's character of Mr. Reed. We have really great chats about his other projects as well, including the Hunger Games, the Ocean's trilogy, and 8 Mile. And we also talk about some of the other films he's worked on, like Traffic. I was really fortunate to get him on the show. He was so generous with his time, and he presents some really great insights into the industry, his role as a production designer, and some really fun stories about working on these sets. I really hope you enjoyed the interview, and I'll see you on the other side. Enjoy.
Well, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate it. It was Hugh Grant got a Golden Globe nomination today, which I
I
thought was
saw that.
cool for Heretic. So I thought that was very
That's
cool. I don't
yeah.
understand why it was in the musical or comedy category because it's neither. But,
Yeah,
it's a little
that was interesting, wasn't it?
like okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I've seen it twice, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But yeah, comedy was an interesting category for it to be for him to be nominated for. But yeah,
Yeah,
still fantastic that he was nominated
yeah.
nonetheless.
Very.
Though
You know what?
that's
He
awesome.
was. He deserves it. He worked really hard. I mean, the show really rests on his shoulders. So
Yeah,
I think I'm glad that he's receiving some recognition for it. Even if it's just a nomination, I think it's super cool.
absolutely. Well, I actually wanted to ask you that. I don't know if you've seen this interview, but he actually said it was for an ABC broadcast in Australia, and he said that you are the greatest production designer in the world. And I and
Really?
I just wanted to. Yeah,
Oh,
he did.
I gotta
He
find
did.
that. My mom would love that.
Yeah, I'll have to send you the interview link because I wanted to ask you what it's like to. How does it feel when actors connect with the environment that you create around them, enabling them to play these characters?
Um,
Because it's quite an intense role that he has to play,
yeah,
and what's it
yeah. I
like when
mean,
you
look,
hear that?
as cool as I like to play it, when an actor comes on the set and recognizes the set. And look, this was not a big movie at all, and the sets were not big, but they really kind of had an arc to them, and they really told a story. Um, when an actor comes on and kind of much like a costume designer helps complete a character through the costumes. I've talked to many costume designers, and they say that they when the actor puts on the clothing and says, "Now I understand the character," it's like a big moment for the costume designer, and we all are there. Sometimes my work is background. Sometimes it's not as kind of an intimate relationship to the character as this was, but I was very happy to kind of be intrinsically involved in helping to create this character. And Hugh was super involved, which, you know, not having worked with him before, and actors can have opinions, and when they can get into the mix into my world and make it like difficult and kind of muddy it a little bit, or they can really elevate it if it's the right kind of relationship. And it was the right kind of relationship with Hugh. He thought deeply about this character. He didn't want it to be like a two-dimensional character. He really thought about this person as a real person, and the journey that he takes with these two girls from the front door to the depths of his tunnel basement freezer locker room. So I thoroughly enjoyed. I first got a list from him of things he had been thinking about. The director said, "Oh, Hugh wants to connect with you, and he has some ideas." And just honestly, my first thought was, because we're already down a road. We've been prepping already for a while, and it's not that um, I don't welcome the ideas. It's just that can we get to the point where we can kind of realize them in a, from a budget, from a creative way, and we're going to start shooting in a couple weeks, and all, but the things that Hugh sent were, I saw how important they were to him. Little details, and a lot of them don't even show on camera, but things to make him feel like he can help kind of flesh out this character as a three-dimensional person. Um, and it made my work better, 10 times better. And I got to be buddies with him, on the set, and he was just a cool guy, super, super smart guy. Um, I didn't really know his work other than what we all, have seen of like Notting Hill and, For Weddings and all
Yeah.
that stuff. And this made me really, really respect him as a world-class actor. And I don't say that. I was very impressed. The sheer amount of monologue he had every day to deliver. This movie rested squarely on his shoulders, and it was going to live or die on his performance, and that's a lot of pressure for an actor. So anyway, I couldn't be happier that he got recognized. I think he's a cool guy, and I'm just very happy for him. I sent a note to the directors. I don't have Hugh's email, but I sent a note saying, please congratulate him for me. And um, yeah, it was like a little family up there. Sometimes it was one of those great experiences on a small film. Like you could be on a small film and it could be a nightmare because you just don't have the resources or
Right.
capacity or to realize what you're trying to do. But this was actually fine money wise, but the group was so kind of led by the script and by our directors, and then by Hugh as his character. It was just a wonderful experience. It really, I I couldn't have been happier with doing that film. I haven't done a horror. I don't know if I would classify it as a horror film. I don't know what I would classify it as, but it was kind of like something I hadn't really done before.
Mm.
Scary sets. I don't know, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So
I
there's my short answer.
was gonna. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I was gonna ask you about working on a horror film because I feel like the way an audience sort of watches a horror film can be slightly different to other genres, where you're always looking in the background. You're kind of always keeping an eye out for clues and the
looking
mystery
for the,
of horror
yeah,
films.
looking for the
And
clues.
I wanted to ask whether you're
Go ahead.
yeah. And so I was wondering, how was your process different to maybe other genres, or was it mostly the same?
Well, the thing that was the most different is being in a limited number of sets for such a long amount of time, and I knew that there was going to be
Right.
time to explore them. But the script was specific in tone, but open ended in detail, which I loved because it's like I get to bring my point of view to bear. Um,
Yeah.
so the fact that we were in the front room for a long time, and it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day, and I think in the script that it was the first room was described as a little bit cold, like oddly bare and lit by a single light bulb. I'd have to reread the script again, but that's my memory of like even like I think gray walls or something like that. And in the discussion with Scott and Brian, uh, we kind of together came like we should make the front room kind of oddly inviting because we have to. This is such a slow burn. There's going to be time for the scary sets to develop. It's like It's like a spider web. It's like yeah, the windows are way too small, and I had a buddy who's a set decorator text me the other day. He's seen the movie and he's like, yeah, that first scene when I saw that tiny window behind them, I was like, I thought you had gone insane. And he's like, that is something. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly how you want it to play. Is that like you notice, like when Hugh, it's the same kind of idea when they come in and Hugh goes, oh, by the way, there's metal in the walls. Are you okay with that? And they go, yeah, I guess. And then it's like,
Yeah.
and then you realize later what that means. But so it's sort of like the details. What we had talked about is let's let's design this room and decorate this room as if Hugh was trying to convince people that he had a wife, that this is the wife's room.
Mm,
So all the choices were
mm,
maybe like a little too perfect, maybe a little too off in a way. Like
mhm.
I had this idea about the yellow wallpaper, which is like kind of like what like an older person might have, but it was kind of like a little bit on steroids. It was like a little too much of what it was supposed to be. It was like overcompensating, I guess would be the term, right? Like he's trying to overcompensate for, oh
Mm,
look, there's the knitting set, and but we were very careful. Like the
mm.
guys didn't want knitting needles in it because there was like they didn't want anything that could be used as a weapon. Um, and
Right.
and we had like the little figurines that she would have collected. So it was
Yeah.
me channeling Mr. Reed's character, trying to channel a
Mhm.
wife that he may or may not have ever had. So that kind of
Right.
stuff was really fun. It
Mm,
felt very close to kind of theater, because it very was like
mm,
presentational. Um, uh, that was that was I wouldn't say different because I feel like I always do that to some extent, but this was like a very like fine tip on all those conversations. That everything really meant something for the collective in this. And the guys did cutaways like I think our producer Stacy Scher came up with the needlepoint of "Bless This Mess," which we had made. So it's like it was very much
yeah.
it was fun. It's like, and the hardest part is the beginning, and once you start, like
Mm,
the front room was kind of the first place I started, and once you have like a point A, now it's slightly easier. Now you have a roadmap to start the other points along the
mm,
way. So I think the beginning is always the
yeah.
hardest, right? And
Mm,
and the
mm,
guys were really into horror genre, and they knew all the missteps, and they're like, we do not want people in the theater going like they wouldn't do that or don't go through that door, like
mm,
he like they were
mm.
very specific, like we do not want any
Yeah.
of the trappings of those kind of movies where um they make choices that are not intelligent or not realistic. So
Mm,
the house had to kind of compensate for that, like the lock on the door and the small
mm,
windows, all that kind of stuff uh,
yeah.
was fun, and it came down to little details like
Mm,
I think in the script it was a little hidden switch that Mr. Reed has locked the door with. And then my
mm,
decorator, Hamish Purdy, fantastic set decorator up in Vancouver, he came and because we talked about like what can we make it better? Like that's a great idea, but how can we kind of up that?
mm.
And he found this old lock from a bank vault, which I don't know if I think it's in the trailer when he sets the lock with the two time dials,
Yeah.
and then I said, well, let's hide it behind the light switch, let's so it's
Yep.
like um I'm always cognizant to um I want to add and enhance, but I don't ever want to take that voice and start taking a right hand turn with it. I'm always kind of very aware of trying to stay on their path because this script was
Mm,
so great. It didn't need changes. It didn't need, it was like, it was kind of great as is.
mm,
And the guys were so smart. So it was fun to, like, when the right choice came, and I'm sure there were choices that we pitched that never flew. I can't think of one right now, but I know there were. But
mm,
when the right one was there, you go, oh yeah, that's great. That really fits with
mm,
Mr. Character. Then we started talking about how analog he would be, and like he wouldn't have a
mm,
computer. When you start, you're like, it's a contemporary film. It's like, does he have a
mm,
computer? Does he have a cell phone? Like the girls have a cell phone, obviously, um, and then it sort of started us on this, like, oh no, he's all analog, like the
mm.
slide projector, like all this stuff that's sort of a little bit from another era. Um,
Yeah.
it was, I don't know, that sort of generated a flight path of little set decorating and prop kind of deals that we sprinkled out throughout the film, which were indicated, but not indicated in that great. No script ever has that amount of that I've ever worked on has that amount of detail where it describes exactly the things that you need here and there. That's what we do is add to it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so interesting to say that because all that stuff is so well thought out and so well done in the film. And I wanted to ask about your collaboration with the director of photography. So, for
yeah,
example, I noticed in sort of the first room in the house, everything's, as you said, lit by like a single candle and things like that. And I wanted to ask how important that collaboration is between a production designer and a DOP, and what were the conversations you had on Heretic?
Well, no, it's extremely important. Chung, who was a wonderful guy, he came into the process, and this unfortunately is often the case. Like, they're so expensive, they come in with a few weeks of prep. They don't, we maybe have a couple of conversations up front, but my work is kind of like it's rolling by the time they come in. And I was very respectful of, like, I'm getting a lot of information of this. These are what the sets are going to look like, because he was in LA and he didn't, I think he maybe came up for one, like a tech scout early, and then went home and then came back. But um, there was those conversations, but then also conversations that Scott and Brian had with Chung, that if I wasn't communicating with Chung directly in that early prep, then the boys were. So, like, one thing that came up in the beginning was like the first room is, the guys in those first two rooms, the living room and the study, they were concerned that visually it could get stale, because we're in these rooms for like 25 pages,
Right.
that what can we do? um so, like, in the first room, when the timer, they came up with it was not in the original script, the idea of the timer timing out and the lights going off. They came up with
Right.
that. So there was a few things that they came up with, I'm sure, with Chung's input, of like how to do lighting changes on the set as we went along, and
Yeah.
that became really important. Like, even down to like the light fixture in the ceiling, they wanted one bulb to be out, and so we had to have something that
Right.
exposed. I think the fixture we had originally had like a glass globe at the bottom, but we took that off, and it's like all these little things that kind of are imperfect, like the wabi sabi. So it's like these little things that the girls noticed. There was also something that didn't make it, where like a piece of the wallpaper, kind of by the hearth, by the fireplace, had peeled away, and there was another piece of old wallpaper in back of it. Like, Mr. Reed had maybe, there were a lot of conversations about, has he done this before in this particular way, and has he sort of perfected his method, and has he, like the idea of iterations, obviously, right, which is so important for the
Yeah.
idea of the film. So even like in the house, it was like iterations of even the wallpaper, and little things like in the where the clock timer is, like we actually put lead kind of around it, so when you open it, you see like a little bit of the metal in the walls that he described, like super subtle, like little details.
Yeah.
It was like stuff like that. And then like the darkness of the hallway, I remember we were discussing, and I picked a very kind of dark, middle to dark character, gray, because there were a lot of discussions about that statue at the end. Like, how can we make that statue feel realistic? How can we have a little bit of light on the girls, and a little bit of the right amount of light on that statue? Because, like, 1 degree too much, and you saw it fake right from the beginning. There was no, there was
Yeah.
the jig was up. And even to the point where I think we even talked about in that first, when the girls first see it, should it be a guy dressed like a human being,
Right.
and then when they get closer, they realize it's a statue. But that didn't.
Yeah.
So what we ended up doing is putting the bust. We created it. It was Epicurus. We put it on a little turntable, and the prop guy behind just gave it, because it does move. And that when they it just gave it a little turn of the turntable. But we went down to that hallway many times with Chung and his lighting guys, and like, we decided we had to backlight it a little bit, because at some point it was just too. If it was just in black, it was too dark. You didn't see anything. And
Yeah.
Chung, he's the master of black, like deep black on screen, like really gorgeous black. And so, like, how much can we keep adding a little bit more, one more point, keep coming up one more point, so like you see it but you don't see it. And it was very subjective
Yeah.
kind of place, and Chung was brilliant at that kind of stuff. And like in the basement, the first basement room, with the skylight, the sort of unreachable skylight. I mean, that room was so tall. It sort of didn't,
Yeah.
in real life, I don't know how much sense it made, but it was like, so it was just so tall that like they at first it
Mm.
was going to be all lit with an iPhone, and then we introduced the skylight above, but the guys were super adamant that they could not ever reach it or not even begin to reach it. Um,
Right.
and then the idea of like coming in with a candle, I think that was something that Chung had brought
Mm.
in when Mr. Reed comes in with the candle. So
Mm.
there were our parameters were very tight. So the ideas like were there weren't a lot of places to go, with it.
Mm.
But I,
Yeah.
I think Chung came up with very cool ways to kind of enhance the lighting realistically, and actually change it throughout the scene enough that it kept your interest. And his camera moves were super cool. The camera was always
Mm.
in motion, so that was an intrinsic part of keeping like the interest in these rooms. So yeah, he was cool. I like him a lot. He was a good dude. I think in the last room where the women are in cages, I think it was scripted as a black room, and I remember going to the guys and because they wanted to build it in a cold like a cold room because they wanted the breath. They
Mm.
wanted that real. They didn't want CG breath. Um,
Mm.
and I remember pitching him like, let's what do you think about like I feel like it should be this galvanized metal, something you can buy it at the building supply store, um, but also
Mm.
the reflections you get off of it and the idea that it feels like the inside of a refrigerator or something to me. It's like
Right.
like kind of
Mm.
and also the way the kind of graphic lines, the wide angle lens, all the graphic lines all kind of went to Mr. Reed, and then we had
Mm.
just like a couple of fluorescent lights. One was hanging. I think Chung asked us, let's take the one off the ceiling and put it on the floor. And so it was,
Oh.
um, I love working on productions when there's talent, like
Mm.
huge talent, but low egos. And I feel like this was one of those shows where there was great talent, but the egos were all in service of this story and in Scott and
Mm.
Brian's vision. And I
Mm.
feel like Chung and I really tried to kind of like show them what could be possible, but also never like trying to waver from their initial vision, which, like I said before, was so strong. So it was
Mm.
the DP asked you to take a light off the ceiling and put it on the floor, and you go, ah, shit, I wish I had thought of that. I was like, that's a really good idea.
Mm.
So just stuff
Right.
like that it was fun collaborating with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The attention to detail is absolutely remarkable. And I wanted to ask you. So you've done the Oceans trilogy, and you also did the Hunger Games franchise as
Sure,
well. And I wanted to ask what it was like designing for films that are sequential, that the sets and environments develop with the characters and the story,
sure.
and you have this attention to detail that is maintained through each and every one of them. And how does that kind of develop as you're going through each
Well, it's
episode?
funny. It's like you could say that the first one is hard, and the
Mm.
second one, you have the first one as a scaffolding, but then you have to kind of expand on it. And I gotta say, when I did the first Hunger Games, um, the other books hadn't come out yet. So we started the first Hunger Games before the book was actually in bookstores when it was in galleys. So
Mm.
it hadn't come out. It had Jennifer was not Jennifer yet. It was sort of like a little bit of a humble beginning in a way. I remember
Yeah.
we talked about, I kind of worked closely with Suzanne Collins, the writer and creator, and really kind of got to pick her brain because those books in particular, you read it and you walk away with such a specific image in your head, but then you go
Yeah.
back and you try to look for the specific words, and it's brilliant that it's kind of vague and it really lets
Mm.
you fill in the blanks yourself, which I think is
Yeah.
the mark of a great writer. So once I started
Mm.
kind of breaking it down, once I got over the first read of it and start breaking it down, I'm like, well, what the hell is District 13, and how did they
Mm.
get the whole underground? Like, what is that thing? And it's never
Mm.
described in the book. It's never described what's happened to the world and why it's really kind of developed in this way. So we had to do a lot of kind of like filling in the blanks with that. So that's the difficulty of the first one, is sort of just getting that idea up and running. Um,
Right.
and we did not have a lot of money for the first film at all. I think
Mm.
there's, yeah, the chariot, like the scene with the apartment. the entering the Capitol on the chariots, which they didn't want a driver. We originally had a chariot driver and the two kids in the back, and the director Gary Ross, he's like, no, they have to be driverless. So we actually had to create a compartment with a slot, which VFX covered over later on. So there was a guy at Katniss and Peeta's feet, a guy driving the horses through a little slot with the reins.
Wow.
Yeah, which was kind of nuts. And we did a lot of testing on that, and we had to really kind of
Mhm.
work in conjunction with try to find small driver horse drivers. So anyway, there were little glimpses of the Capitol in the first one, but we were careful
Mm.
because of money and because of like the story. It's like you didn't want to show too much of the Capitol because you were going
Mm.
back to it later. Like the first
Yeah.
control room, which I did as sort of a circular thing with images in the center and kind of cool lighting around and tiered, almost like a little amphitheater kind of vibe to it. I remember on the second one, the freedom is that like every gamekeeper, game maker, I almost forget what they're called at this point. Um, they come in and they rebuild this thing from scratch. So I get to have the
Mm.
same idea with like a little bit more money and a little bit more kind of time, and I get to kind of make it better. But it was still kind of the same
Mm.
idea. And with
Yeah.
the cornucopia, like the first one, um, I remember I was doing an interview years ago, and they were asking me about the cornucopia, and I was like, that was the first thing I designed because it scared me the most. Of like, this could look really goofy if I don't get this right. Um,
Right.
and in the book, it's described as like a like it sort of looks like a like a table setting cornucopia, like
Mm.
very kind of almost
Mm.
literal with the things kind of piling out, like almost like you just imagine without knowing anything about the film, uh,
Mm.
like filling out and all the weapons and stuff. And I wanted to make it more menacing, more like sculptural. I sort of like was thinking like if Frank Gehry, or some deconstructivist architect kind of had designed the cornucopia, like make it like an art
Mm.
piece, you know.
Mm.
Even down to like I think um, and it's a very faceted kind of thing, and it still has a cornucopia shape, but it's kind of like an evil cornucopia, which I always liked. Um,
Yeah.
and on the interior, I remember they were getting ready to put the interior skin on it, and I went down to the shop and I looked at it, and it was kind of unfinished inside with just the framework and the underside, and I was like, oh, let's leave it like that's great. Let's just do that instead. That's much better than like putting a skin on the inside. So there's
Right.
also opportunities as you're building stuff to kind of see like where things can go. Anyway, so on
Mm.
the second cornucopia for catching fire, I sort of
Mm.
I worked with that kind of deconstructivist idea, but I sort of did it in a very different way, and that was super. It was
Mm.
super fun. Like the first one
Mm.
was scary, and then after
Mm.
like no one questioned the first one at all when they saw the movie, and I'm like, okay, cool, that worked. And
Yeah.
so the second one, so that was like an iteration kind of thing on that, and
Mm.
then the last two, which were like mega. We made the last two back to back with no. We made it like one big movie, so it
Yeah.
was like 156 days of shooting. We did 100 days in Atlanta, and a
Mm.
normal movie is like 50, 60, 70. Like you can
Okay.
go up
Yeah.
to like 80 days is sort of a pretty good sized movie. This was like
Mm.
twice a big movie.
Yeah.
Um, so we did Atlanta, Berlin, and Paris.
Yeah.
So that was like I just get exhausted thinking about it because at one point I had three art departments all working at the same time, and so when my art director and I would be done with the like our day in Atlanta, then we'd be morning overseas, and we get on the phone with them, and like that their day was just starting, and they'd be sending us drawings, and it was like it just seemed like I was on 24/7. It was I
Yeah.
remember getting the day, I think it was 78, so it must have been 156 days, the halfway point, and going like we're only halfway there. I don't know if I could do another one of these things I just did again.
Yeah.
Um, but it was
Mm.
cool. Then we went to like Berlin, and the crew in Berlin was.
Mm.
We went to Paris first, and they were great. It's like they had been working on their little piece, which was still big, but it was like just a
Mm.
piece of the puzzle. In Berlin, the same way, and
Mm.
uh, So I'm just rambling. I'm just as we
No.
talk about it, I'm just remembering things in no particular order
Mm.
whatsoever. Like I remember in
Okay.
there was a scene in I think it's Mockingjay when the hospital, she tours the hospital, and then it gets
Mm.
bombed, and then the kids run, and there's the planes going overhead, and she shoots them down with an arrow, and then that crashes into the hospital. That whole sequence. So that was part of it was in Atlanta. Um, the middle part was in Berlin, and then the end was in Atlanta at a different location where we built like part of. No, dude, it was nutso.
I
Um,
could not imagine.
so you're trying
Wow.
to like put these pieces together, and Francis Lawrence is an amazing like visual director or storyteller. He was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I get it. Like, let's do this." But it's like to shoot. I think we had to shoot the beginning and the end in Atlanta, kind of at the same time, knowing that the whole middle like was going to be
Mm.
months later in Berlin, and kind of like flying without a net a little bit, like knowing that it's
Mm.
trusting that we've planned it out enough that it's going to work. And that's what I love doing stuff like that where it's seamless and no one ever would question that we went to all these different places to make one scene. So we were in
Yeah.
a potassium factory outside of Berlin, which I'm sure was toxic as hell, but it was super cool. It was like
Yeah.
an abandoned factory. Um,
Wow.
and then the Ocean's movies, that was I wouldn't say easier. It was just different in that there wasn't a lot of personal spaces. There was like the big casinos and stuff like that, and like, cool bank vaults, and it was sort of just about
Mm.
like not just I don't. It was big and difficult, but it was like let's
Mm.
just make it look cool. It needs to look cool and slick
Yeah.
and like elevated, like like a Hollywood interpretation of you know of Las Vegas. And I remember like the first time we went to the Bellagio. Our producer Jerry Weintraub for the first one had gotten the Bellagio on board. He knew like the owner personally, and we got to walk
Mm.
around the floor and
Mm.
and uh, and we were like, it was like that scene out of Pee Wee Herman at the Alamo. We're like, oh, can we see the vault? And they were like, there's no vault. We don't have a vault. Why would we keep
Yeah.
a bank? We take it to the bank. And it's like, oh shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, where's the basement?
Yeah.
Oh, there's no basement at the Alamo. It was classic, and we're like, oh shit, there's no. Oh, that's great because now I can just make it whatever I want. The
Exactly.
staff and all that kind of stuff, which was a blast. Um, so those were just like those were just super fun, and the actors
Mm.
in those were all just like they had a really good time. Like in the second
Mm.
one, we went to Europe and we shot in Amsterdam and Italy and
Mm.
Paris. And I remember we there was a scene. I think it's just told in a flashback of George Clooney and Brad Pitt,
Yeah.
and we're in Paris. And Steven said, "Oh, let's look for something with." We're only in Paris for a couple of days. Find something where the Eiffel Tower is in the background. So we ended up finding the Australian um, consulate, like the ambassador to France from Australia, his
Mm.
apartment, which was this cool like concrete apartment, and we ended up shooting on the terrace with a beautiful view of Paris and the Eiffel Tower. And
Wow.
Steven showed it. This is sort of like a joke between us now because we went to great lengths for this Eiffel Tower. The only way you ever
Mm.
see the Eiffel Tower is in the reflection of Brad Pitt's sunglasses. There's no,
No way.
it's no, but it's kind of awesome. It's like
Yeah.
it was awesome. Actually, I loved it. That's Soderbergh. That's Steven all the way.
Yeah.
And then we were based out of Italy, and I had offices at Cinecittà, which is like Fellini's studio in Rome. It was amazing.
Mm.
And we were going to shoot the interior of the Galleria Nazionale. It was like the National Gallery, and we scouted a bunch of times. And this is like so
Mm.
Italian in a way. It's like kind of at the 11th hour, they were like, we can't really shoot there anymore. Or I think it was something in their constitution said that they could not close a gallery, private, like have a private event. Like it always had to be open to the public, which if you know Italians, it's like perfect. Like the art is
Mm.
they're always accessible. We can always go to the museum.
Mm.
So
Mm.
we talked about it. Can we actually do this with like parts of the museum open? And so it was like, no way. So kind of like at the 11th and a half hour, um, we decided we're going to build it in LA and shoot it in Los
Mm,
Angeles show. So I had a crew in Los Angeles that I'd worked with a bunch,
mm,
did all the drawings, and they
mm.
built the whole museum in Los Angeles, like the big gallery. We had all the statuary made in excuse me, in Rome and shipped over. Um, it was a little bit nuts, but it totally
Mm.
worked. It was cool.
Yeah.
And in the last one, we kind of went back to like the Vegas model,
Mm.
but the museum, the casino that they rob is fictional. I designed the entire
Right.
museum, like one of the biggest sets I've ever seen in my life,
Yeah.
on one of the biggest stages in Hollywood. And then we broke out one of the doorways, and some of the set even went out into the into the parking lot.
Gee.
Um, so it was like a
No.
three-story. So I designed a three-story casino, which, if you know anything about gambling, you would never do that because you could look down and see people's cards, and there were all these reasons why you couldn't
Right.
do it. And I'm like, there's all these guys. Like at the end, everybody's in place. You know, it's like the classic
Mm.
heist. Everybody's got their job, and like casino floors are very like flat and one-dimensional that way. They go on
Mm.
forever, but there's
Yeah.
no there's no like volume to them. There's no like vertical space. So I
Yeah.
designed platforms with different machines and this and that. It was cool. It worked really well. So Steven, like, he could shoot up at George on the second floor and then across to Brad, and it really
Mm.
worked out well. But I
Yeah.
think that most people, we had like a working fountain, we had the lobby, we literally built everything associated with that casino was built. Excuse me, built on stage. Um, I remember reading things like, "Oh, they shot in the Aladdin, or they shot in the this or that." Like everybody was like speculating with. Like, it was like I think they would have even thought that we built it because it was so ridiculous.
Mm.
But that was really fun. That was super fun to work on.
Amazing.
Everything worked.
Wow.
The bar served drinks. We had non-alcoholic beer. I think we kept a little bottle of vodka for the producer. But all the what are the Wonder Bar, those little fountains, all those worked. We had kegs of like I said, non-alcoholic beer, so people can
Mm.
go up and order drinks at the bar. All the machines worked.
Wow.
We built and rented all working machines. All the slot machines worked. It was like literally you could just walk in, turn the lights on, and you have a casino. So
Wow.
it was super cool.
That's incredible. And I bet from a directing point of view, it would be so good to be on set and come up with ideas on the spot. I know that sets
Sure,
are quite like,
sure.
you're getting it done, but just to be able to look around and come up with ideas,
Yeah. No, it was great. It was really great.
yeah. I've always been curious about stunt work within sets, and I wanted to ask as a production designer, when you read on the page that a stunt's going to take place, and I'm thinking ones that come to mind are for example, The Hunger Games, and even sort of The End of Mother and films like that you did. I wanted to ask, do you have to communicate with the stunt team to allow these stunts
Oh,
to have the
completely,
space
completely.
to make them happen?
And
And what are the conversations like?
they always want more space, and they want nothing in the way. You know, that was
Yeah.
But so on the Hunger Games, we were lucky to have Chad Stahelski, who went on to direct the John Wick movies. He was our stunt coordinator.
Yeah.
So
Wow, I didn't know that.
yeah, no, he was awesome.
Wow.
He was a blast to work with and super cool. And he got sort of like why things were a certain way, and he was very respectful of the art department. You know, the art department comes in pretty early into the process, earlier than a lot of
Mm.
the other departments. So one thing I
Mm.
try to do is, as I'm designing the sets, really think about like the lighting, the costumes, the stunts, the camera work. Like really, you try to take a pass at making it accessible and shootable for all of that, but still do something you want. I always say it's better
Mm.
to have pre-thought about all that stuff and built it in than, oh, I'm just going to do
Mm.
this, and then if we have to change it, we'll change it. No, then it's like then it could become a mess. Or if you get the right people and everybody's
Mm.
respecting everyone else's work and vision, then it all
Mm.
works. It's all great, you know.
Mm.
And often they'll come and they'll go, "Oh, can you give me a little bit more room? Can you move that column over a little bit or something?" And you go, "Yeah," because like I get it. You don't want their work to be compromised because of your work, and
Yeah.
often it's very minor stuff. Or can you put some
Mm.
boxes over there? We need to hide a rig. We need to put some set dressing over there. That
Mm.
always comes up. It's always stuff like that. Can you hide this? Can you hide that? Like the cable
Yeah.
rig or the winch, can put something in front of the winch. And
Mm.
so I like when you can, I actually worked on a movie years ago called The Last Airbender, which
Yeah.
is some of it's not a great movie. It's not even a good movie. Unfortunately, I hope Knight doesn't hear this. But Knight's a great guy, and he's actually brilliant. This was not. This was a swing and a miss. Um,
Mm.
but I did get to design some super cool sets. And I remember there's one
Mm.
set, there's a fight in particular where they're running around the walls and they're jumping up on top. Like, it was
Mm.
super interactive with the set dressing, and there was a lot of discussion about things that could be broken, that could be like big pottery jars that could be smashed, and things they could run and jump up on the walls. I do remember something where the kid like ran almost like horizontally around part of the wall, and
Mm.
so that stuff's kind of fun to figure out, like pieces that have to
Yeah.
come away, and they're all like puzzle pieces,
Mm.
so it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something I've really been curious about, and sorry, I'm aware I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really appreciate how much time you're giving me.
Okay.
But I just wanted to ask about what if there's any difference in your work between filming on film or digital. Because it's got a very different look on screen. I was just wondering if there's anything in terms of maybe colors that change at all between working on film and digital.
No, the one thing that's cool. So when you work on film, which I haven't done in years now, you'd go see daily,
Mm.
and the dailies would be, I think they would be color timed, or at least a first pass at. But you didn't have access to the image, like as like
Mm.
the monitors and all this stuff. It's like they weren't as one to one with what
Mm.
you're getting. Now, when you're shooting on video, I'm looking like I go in, a DIT, a digital imaging technology, like the guy that is actually coloring. There's a guy on set who's actually working with the cinematographer who they set a template, I think a lookup
Mm.
template, a LUT, for how the film is going to look. So that is actually pretty well represented on the director's monitor. But then you go in the
Mm.
tent and you could look in and you go, oh, that's really what it's like, usually a lot kind of deeper and uh, more depth to the whole thing. So you actually, like, on the day, you could see almost exactly what it's going to be in the end, more than when it was on film. There was a little bit of like
Mm.
colors reacting a little bit differently. But no, it's really uh, what your eye sees for the most part.
Mm.
Now, you can come in and kind of use different color temperature on the lamps that make your paint colors look a lot different. And we try to do that in camera tests before, where we set up little 2 wall sets and we put costumes
Mm.
in a like a little 10 by 10 corner you build, and
Mm.
like with the colors I'm thinking of, the major kind of palette colors, some lamps, so you could test like color temperature on the lights and the costumes, and you
Yeah.
kind of create a little vignette, and then
Mm.
that's when I actually make adjustments based on that, because that's early
Right.
enough in the process that you can still make some adjustments, but and sometimes it's like, oh wow, it's very, it's like it's a creative process. Sometimes it looks very different than what you would imagine, and then you adjust to it so your work shows in the way you want it to, or the way the director wants it to. Um,
Mm.
that's the process. I don't know. Film is so long ago now. I don't.
Mm.
Uh, it's funny. It worked. It
Mm.
totally worked. It was gorgeous. Film was
Mm.
gorgeous. Uh,
Yeah.
I remember when we did 8 Mile. Guy,
Mm.
great cinematographer Rodrigo Prieto shot it, and he would use his bleach bypass, and it
Right.
kind of like deepened the blacks. It kind of like it bloomed the whites a little bit. It made it all a little bluish. And it was my first time. It was kind of like, it was very popular for a heartbeat, in the early 2000s. And that was film. That absolutely was film. So we'd run
Right.
some tests of it, and that actually looked very different than your eye. It was like it was
Mm.
a real process to it. Um,
Yeah.
remember on Traffic, Steven used flashing, which is basically, as you're developing the film, you flash it with light for like a millisecond, and it sort of it blossoms the lighting. It's all stuff you could do with digital technology, super easy now, but it was all done
Mm.
by hand. And I remember us shooting the same scene a couple of times because like they didn't get the flashing right, they flashed it for too much, and it's like it sort of all ballooned out white, and then we shot it again. There wasn't a
Mm.
second crack at it. And now with
Yeah.
digital, you could take it any direction you want. So
Mm. Absolutely.
I would say that I don't really get a second crack at my sets. They get a lot of cracks at
Yeah.
how the film looks in the end, but that's cool. Uh,
Yeah. Oh wow, yeah, that's so interesting.
yeah.
I just want to get you out of here on this one. I wanted to ask, do you have any advice for people interested in production design or art direction in the industry? What do you kind of, because you've worked on a lot of music videos, shorts, commercials. Do you think there's any way that people can kind of engage with this industry and
Well, I
develop
mean,
their skills?
so the interesting about this industry is there's no one way in. There's no like kind of silver bullet.
Mm.
Um, uh, you know, I think our industry is changing a lot right now. I think streaming has kind of, in some ways, kind of lamed our industry a bit. I hope that the return to cinema, to theaters is imminent. I don't
Yeah.
know. People are worried about AI, and there's a lot of conversation
Mm.
about AI and the creative world. And like, I always thought that that the artists would be the last ones standing with AI, and it almost seems like we're kind of on the front line in a lot of ways. If something could be, if they could take people and time and money out of the equation, it's a business. It's
Yeah.
art, but it's very much a business. Anyway,
Mm.
to your point, I didn't go to film school. I know a lot of people that went to film school. I have a lot of, like my driver in New York went to film school, so that should tell you like something.
Yeah.
I think film school is great. Uh,
Mm.
I think the real experience comes from being on set. So I would say
Yeah.
get on set any way you can. Uh,
Mm.
I would say unpaid internships, especially when you're in
Mm.
school. I think and even that is now difficult. I used to have interns all the time, but now it's like because of insurance and they have to get school credit. It's like now it's gotten so much more complicated. It used to be like, oh, I'd have
Yeah.
someone come and shadow me for a few weeks, and now it's like the studios. It's just I get it. It just used to be a lot more like the circus years ago. Now it's kind of the corporate kind of like when you got
Mm.
Apple and Amazon and all these
Mm.
like huge mega companies making films.
Mm.
They bring their ethos of the mega company to your little film, and
Mm.
it's I don't know. It's a tough one.
Mm.
I started at the ground up. I
Mm.
started drafting back in the day when
Yep.
you actually put a pencil on paper and drew a set.
Mm.
Um, that doesn't,
Yep.
now it's all computer. I work mostly on
Mm.
computer now. Um,
Mm.
I don't know.
Mm.
I've had a lot of people ask me, and I don't think I've ever come up with a satisfactory answer to that.
That's right.
Because
Yeah.
it used to be like, oh, come move to LA, and now, without
Mm.
sounding like bitter, I don't even work in LA anymore. I work all over the place. So, um,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? There's almost no like
Mm.
and I've had friends, a lot of people from the Hunger Games, um, move to Atlanta, and
Yeah.
Atlanta was like a big hotspot in the States and has been and probably will be again. But
Mm.
Marvel's kind of relocating all their stuff to London, and then you hear about the Eastern European
Mm.
countries, and everybody's looking for a deal, so it's even hard to know
Yep.
where to live when you're starting
Yeah.
out. You know what I mean? I
Mm.
think LA is still a pretty good bet in the States because there's, like you said, music videos is. I do most of my commercial work. I'm on a commercial right now, and we do most of our commercial work based out of LA. So that's still
Right.
there's a lot of TV, obviously, but feature films are few and far between for me in Los
Mm.
Angeles.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
Reach out to people. I've had people reach out to me for
Yeah.
advice, and I was try to
Mm.
respond and give them what I can in the way of advice. I don't know. I wish I had a good answer.
No, that's perfect. No, I totally understand that, and I appreciate you taking the time to answer that question.
So,
Thank you so much for coming on the
oh,
podcast. I
thank you.
really appreciate you coming on. Your insights were incredible, and Heretic is a brilliant film.
Oh, thank you.
I can't wait to see more and more people see it.
Sure.
I'm really excited. I just saw the A24. I'm a bit of a 4K Blu-ray geek, and I saw that A24 released a pre-order for a special 4K, and I'm definitely going to be getting that one.
Cool. All
Of
right. Well,
course.
good
Thank
luck.
you so much for your
And
time.
hopefully
Appreciate it.
we'll do this again on the next one.
I would love to. I would love to.
Okay, man.
Thank you.
All right.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.
Bye.
Bye.